plenty to get to. Maggie, how are you?
I'm
back in the
great.
studio this morning.
I know. How about that? Back in the studio for the first time since what was it, March 12th of 2020, something like that.
Yeah.
Back here today. Just back for a day, though. Going to be back, unfortunately, back home after this. But it feels weird, feels crazy, it feels great. It feels a lot of feels going on. All the feels, really. And it was great to see Boomer and Gio and Eddie this morning, and maybe Alex.
Yeah, for sure. A good spot on with the morning show this morning. And it looks like you're doing it like from your phone from the Carton and Roberts studio. That's what...
Is that what it looks like? Cool. Yeah, I'm it's low tech. It's always been a little low-fi for the Moose and Maggie show, has it not?
I asked Dove, I go, is Maggie, because I thought maybe they'd be using one of the cameras in the studio.
No.
Is Maggie on a laptop right now? And Dove's like, I have no idea. And then he's like, yes, I think she is. I go, oh, okay, there you go.
Well,
I thought it was going to be a...
They really rolled out the red carpet for me, Moose, coming back. They really pulled out all the stops. They were like, Maggie's coming. We got to make sure everything's right.
It's all good. It's all good.
By the way, here's a closet for you to go use as an office.
You made it back. You made it there safe and sound. And we got you for the next 4 hours, right up until 2 o'clock this afternoon, Maggie. And, last night the Yankees returned to action in the Bronx, and fall the Blue Jays 6-2. And, Matz looked great. I mean, going out there, he looked stellar over his, 6+ innings of work for Toronto. Guerrero Jr. hitting his 16th home run. They jumped out on top 3-0. The Yankees really couldn't put together and muster any sort of offense whatsoever. But really, the story out of the game was Corey Kluber, as we gave him a lot of credit following his no-hitter down in Texas against the Rangers. And talked about that a lot last week. Well, last night, he leaves the game after 3 innings due to shoulder tightness. He's going to have an MRI today. He said after the game he wouldn't say he was alarmed. He said it doesn't feel at all like what I dealt with a year ago. So that's a positive. But the negative is, you have a guy that's had shoulder issues,
yep.
Right? The negative is that, he did feel uncomfortable enough, and the Yankees felt like they were, that he needed to come out of the game last night. And, it brings to, a comment I saw last week where, Andy Martino, friend of the show, SNY, after that no-hitter, he mentioned an unnamed scout said, well, yeah, Kluber looks great now. Let's see what Corey Kluber looks like, at the end of the season, because he's barely pitched. And how is Corey Kluber physically going to hold up as this season does go along? Well, first start after that no-hitter, Maggie, he's leaving the game after 3 innings, and hopefully the MRI's clean. An athlete knows his body better than everybody else. He said it feels nothing like it did a year ago, but it still felt bad enough where he could not push through it, and uncomfortable enough to where he could not push through it, and the Yankees are going to have that MRI, and we'll find out what their MRI results together.
Yeah, you can't help but look at the timing of this and wonder, oh man, could it have been related to the no-hitter at all in terms of someone pushing themselves? And listen, we know, and Aaron Boone said it last night, he said that he didn't want to jump to any conclusions because of how efficient Corey Kluber was working during that no-hitter. He threw like 101 pitches. It wasn't, 136-pitch outing. But Moose, let's not forget, those are some stressful pitches. I mean, sometimes it's not even so much about the amount. Sometimes it can be about the type of pitch, the stressful pitch. I mean, hell, I know he wasn't throwing the ball, but Kyle Higashioka said he was having panic attacks in between the 8th and 9th inning. I can imagine even Kluber being the Klubot, that's a lot of adrenaline when you are going for that kind of historic thing. So that was the first thing I thought of, like, man, if this is somehow connected in any way to that no-hitter, man, what a bummer. And what did it all mean? What was it worth?
You bring up the example is Santana, right? Santana throws the no-hitter, but he threw, 100 and, how many pitches did he throw that game?
Over 130.
Plus, right. Santana threw a lot. Terry Collins, I remember afterwards, said it was the hardest thing that he's ever gone through, right? Because he realized that Santana obviously wasn't physically 100%, and after he throws that no-hitter for the Mets against the Cardinals, he was never the same.
Right.
I mean, he was just never the same. Now, that's the worst case scenario. And Santana really wasn't the same pitcher then that he was before with Minnesota, because he had been dealing with some injuries with the Mets as well. So you look at Kluber, right? We all understand he's not the same guy that was a 2-time Cy Young Award winner with Cleveland, right? Even the general manager, Brian Cashman, when he hopped on with us before the start of the year, said, we're not expecting that Corey Kluber. He's been great. in his last 5 starts. He really has been.
Yeah.
I mean, Kluber's been very, very good and has turned his season around after his initial 3-4 starts of the year. Now, what is Corey Kluber going to be? Hopefully it's not the case, Maggie, where he completely emptied the tank, last week against Texas. And, it's a correlation to what we saw last night against the Toronto Blue Jays where he's leaving that game.
Well, I hope not. And listen, they're all saying all the right things right now. With Kluber, as you mentioned, saying it felt nothing like, the pain that he had last year. But granted, I mean, this is what happens. Unfortunately, the risk of taking a massive flyer on someone who's had shoulder issues and is coming off of a major shoulder injury. But the thing is about like the Santana comparison, because I know that's like immediately where a lot of our minds kind of go. Like, the thing about that, though, is Santana, what he did for the Mets and throwing that no-hitter, it meant so much. And I'm not saying that Kluber's didn't mean a lot. We debated it at the time, whether or not no-hitters are watered down this year, whether or not the fact that Corey Kluber has barely been a Yankee, was this like earning his pinstripes, all that stuff we talked about the day after the no-hitter. Like, what Santana did was it was so important to the Mets. What Corey Kluber did was a great accomplishment, historic, awesome, all the kudos in the world. But we didn't have a lot of Yankee fans who were calling up saying, like, this was a seminal moment. Moose, you said you didn't even get goosebumps in the last outing. You're the diehard Yankee fan. You're the biggest Yankee fan in my life. So, like, the fact that it would have been all for something that, granted, is a great individual accomplishment, but ultimately is not going to go down as one of the great moments in Yankee history. Let's be honest.
No, it's not. It's not.
Not like Santana is for the Mets.
No. It's not similar in nature at all to what Santana, because no Met had ever thrown a no-hitter. So Santana was the first, and Corey Kluber is not the first Yankee to do that, as we know. So, yeah, and Maggie, we had the conversation, might have been on the air, off the air that day about, did Kluber earn his pinstripes with that no-hitter? And I said, no. I mean, it's really going to be decided on what he does and what he is in October, what he is come playoff time. Because, yeah, you need to have a good regular season to get to the postseason, but what is he? Is he that number 2 starter? Is he that number 3? Maybe Herman ends up being the number 2 behind Garrett Cole. Does he give this team an opportunity to win in the postseason? Can he help this team win a World Series? I mean, those are the things that are going to be the moments that define Corey Kluber and what he is as a Yankee.
Moose, put yourself, though, in the Yankees' shoes today. A lot riding on this MRI, obviously, and then maybe you're going to have to tweak how you're using Corey Kluber maybe in the future, or it could end up being nothing. He goes on the IL for 10 days just for a precautionary measure, and we never speak of this again. But think about it. The way that the Yankees have been pitching, especially lately, and I know Kluber's been a part of that, but the way that they've been pitching lately, do you even think that if they lost Corey Kluber for a big amount of time, that that's actually going to sink the Yankees? Like, the pitching staff's been so good. Like, yeah. A lot is riding on this MRI, but is it? Because if you look at the grand scheme of things, losing him would obviously be huge. We're getting ahead of ourselves. Losing him would be huge. But if they did, I mean, I'm still picking the Yankees to be a dominant team, a playoff run, all of that.
No, well, it gets to the whole thing is like, what injury is the most significant injury, right? You get to that conversation. Well, Giancarlo Stanton's out. Well, the Yankees continue to win games. Before that, Aaron Judge is out, but the Yankees continue to win games. So all of these things that we've gone through over the last 2-3 years, you get to, what's the biggest key to the Yankees? And the answer to that is, well, there's really none, because they've got an unbelievable amount of talent. I mean, but even if Cole went on the IL for 10 days, I mean, or whatever it might be, the Yankees still could survive that. It's but I agree that he is, the most talented player, the most talented, obviously he's a pitcher, but the most talented guy that puts on that Yankee uniform day in and day out, the most dominant at his position when you look at him as being the ace of this staff. Yeah, it's not going to sink the Yankees, but here's where it does weaken them, because you've got Cole. You look at 2 of the last 3 starts. Jordan Montgomery has had 9 strikeouts, 11 strikeouts. He's looked good 2 of the last 3. Domingo Germán's turned a corner. I mean, we're all doing handstands when Jameson Taillon throws 5 innings, right? So, a guy that I liked was Mike King. He stepped in last night. I mean, the Blue Jays were teeing off on him at times. He only gave up 1 run, but he did give up, 6 hits over the course of his 3 innings of work. Maybe it's a time where you get a little Debbie Garcia look here on the major league level, Maggie. But it would hurt this team. It wouldn't sink them, but you felt good for Kluber because of everything we talked about last week, everything that he has gone through.
Definitely.
Banking on himself, taking the 1 year, $11 million deal. The fact that, early on this season, I was joking around that he was more of an opener than a starter because he was only giving this team 3-4 innings of work. And the way that he turned his season around to then see last night him leaving that game after 3 innings, knowing that he's got a history with a shoulder issue, saying it doesn't feel the same, but still uncomfortable enough to where he leaves the game, and the Yankees stressed enough to where they're putting him through the MRI to see exactly what's going on with the shoulder. It wouldn't sink their season for sure, but it would take a good storyline coming out over the last month and a half out of the play right now.
No doubt. Hey, when Vlad Guerrero Jr. hits home runs, does he normally put up the finger to his lips to shush the crowd, or was that last night only? Because if two athletes, I don't
know if that's his thing.
If two athletes are shushing New Yorkers in the same week, we got a big problem here. You can't be coming in at multiple athletes shushing us because, first of all, shush yourself. Like, shush you, bleep, all of that stuff. Like, we're not getting shushed.
Guerrero doesn't care what baseball they were using, does he? He's got 16
there are
home
some
runs
guys
on the season.
Who just are Shohei
and
Ohtani.
He's lost 40 pounds. I mean, he looks like he's a quarter of the guy three-quarters of the guy that he was a year ago. He's lost like 40 pounds.
I know. There's just no rhyme or reason to it at all, but he's just so good. He hit that home run. I saw him shushing the crowd. I was like, oh my goodness, we can't have this. We can't have this happen. It's going to take a really big effort from the Knicks tonight to make sure that Trae Young isn't shushing the Garden again.